Richard Saren's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Thanks for inviting me into your home, your long-haul truck, taxi, RV, camper, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. A special how-do to all of you checking us out on one of our affiliate stations on both sides of the border, the Conspiracy Show app, fabulous and free, and the podcast, of course, StitcherRadio.com, iTunes, TuneIn, and TalkZone.com. Those of you watching are via the Hangout on Air, the live stream on YouTube. Welcome, all of you, however and wherever you're listening. It's great to have you here. Thanks for your company. Richard Estep, paramedic, volunteer firefighter by day, paranormal investigator by night, is standing by to discuss true life paranormal encounters in asylums, hospitals, and institutions. You know, and it makes perfect sense. A lot of ghost hunters, they hang out in cemeteries and trying to capture EVPs and orbs and so forth. And you think about it, why would a ghost hang out in a cemetery? They're gone. They're out of there. By the time the cold body arrives at the gates of Forest Lawn, the spirit has long departed the body. It makes perfect sense that if you're going to go ghost hunting, the place to look is where people are coming and going quite literally, and that would be hospitals and asylums and other institutions where people pass. It's funny, if you talk to people in the healthcare profession, nurses, doctors, paramedics like Richard, if you gain their confidence, it won't be too long before they start talking about paranormal activity that they have witnessed. Get on up to the website, strangeplanet.ca, and check out the radio page, strangeplanet.ca. That's basically a landing page. All my various projects, or most of them, are there. And you can go madly off in all different directions. You can go to the radio page, just click on the radio page, and you'll see The Conspiracy Show, and that is your portal to this program. And tonight's show information is right there. Links to our guests' websites. You just click on their name. Book titles, if they've written books, it's all there. Their biographies. And if you register to become a member, which is fast and it's easy and free, you gain access to special member-only areas like the past show audio archives, which is Albert, my producer's department. And Albert, you can go back, to like the spring, summer of 2012, right, and listen to old shows right there. So it's well worth it. It just takes a moment. Just click on that blue members button on the home page. Again, you go to strangeplanet.ca. That's the landing page. And then figure out where do you want to go from there. The radio page. And you can find this program. Of course, there's a live events page. Speaking of which, let me just remind you again, Saturday, May 21st, at the University of Toronto, I'll be hosting a special event, a conspiracy culture event with Missing 411 Canada author David Paulides. And that's happening again at the University of Toronto, Saturday, May 21st, and you can go to conspiracyculture.com for more information, conspiracyculture.com. I just want to very quickly dip into the mailbag here and acknowledge people are so nice, and I love getting actual mail. Do you remember those days when you used to get mail, things in envelopes and so forth? It's wonderful. Anyway, Alan in Norfolk, Virginia. This must have cost him some money in shipping, U.S. postage. Thank you, Alan. This is very nice. He sent me a copy of a book, not his, but it's. I'm familiar with the book. I don't have it, though. It's Susie Hansen's The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. There's a little free plug for Susie Hansen. And this is about as I say, the alien abduction phenomenon. And Alan writes, a little handwritten note here, Hi, Richard, I'm sending this book because it's the best contactee book I've ever read. I ordered extra copies of this book to give to people. I hope you enjoy this book as much as I did. You have to order this book from New Zealand unless you want the Kindle book. I've been fascinated with UFOs since the 1960s, and the information in this book is the best I've found yet. Enjoy, Alan. Well, Alan, thank you very much. That's very kind. for sending that book along. And then the other thing I wanted to quickly acknowledge, here we go again, another letter from an alleged targeted individual. Where is it? This is from Brenda in Toronto. I won't mention your last name, Brenda. If you're listening, thank you for the letter. It was hand-delivered. Save on postage, why not? But Brenda contacted me, I think it was last week during our open line segment, and she wants me to get behind or throw my weight behind an initiative. She's included the letter here that she has written to Hollywood filmmaker Oliver Stone through the Creative Artists Agency. And she writes, "Dear Mr. Stone, my name is Brenda. I live at," she gives her address in Ontario here with her phone number. She says, "I'm unable to use a computer, so I've arranged for this letter to be sent to you. There is a radio station, Zoomer Radio, in Toronto that transmits to the U.S. as well, The Conspiracy Show. The host, Richard Serrett, he has mentioned you on air regarding a movie you made about JFK. Well, we're all familiar with that. He said it would be nice if you could make a movie about targeted individuals. Numerous people have contacted Richard and forwarded documents and or photos on his show. And then she names when the show airs, Sunday nights from 11 to 1. Do you ever come to Toronto? Do you have a representative in Toronto? Would you be interested? Should you reply to my letter, kindly address it," and then she gives the address. So, Brenda, thank you for this. She sort of also outlined her horrific ordeal as an alleged targeted individual, and would, again, like Oliver Stone, to make a movie about this, which I think, is a no-brainer. This is something I genuinely feel Oliver Stone would be very interested in, and for what it's worth, I would be happy to do what I can to make sure Oliver Stone gets that. Not that I have any contact with Oliver Stone. I do not, I don't float around in those circles, believe me. But it deserves an Oliver Stone treatment. He did such a remarkable job on JFK. Many people see that as a documentary, not a motion picture. But, hey, let's see what happens. Thank you for that, Brenda, and I hope you're well. All right. Let's talk haunted hospitals, asylums, and institutions. I am looking forward to this. Richard Estep has spent the past 2 decades investigating claims of ghosts and hauntings on both sides of the Atlantic. Estep co-founded the Boulder County Paranormal Research Society and has published 2 other books on the paranormal, including In Search of the Paranormal. He's a prolific speaker at British and American genre conventions and has appeared in paranormal video segments for About.com and the documentary film The Ghosts of Illich Theater. Richard is donating, this is nice, he's donating 10% of his royalties from this book. Let me hold it up to the webcam. 10% of the royalties from this book to the St. Baldrick's Foundation, an organization that raises money to combat childhood cancer. He lives in Boulder, Colorado. Richard Estep, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you, sir?
Very well, Richard. And you're in Boulder, Colorado tonight?
I'm just outside. I'm in Longmont, Colorado.
All right. And how did you become transplanted from are you from London originally?
Well, I'm from north of London. It's a place called Leicester.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, and we're most famous these days for soccer fans, of course.
Absolutely.
Will have heard of Leicester City's meteoric rise this week. And we hide our kings under the car parks.
That's right. That's where they found the bones of the remains of King Richard.
It is.
And you have a pretty swell university there as well.
We have a couple, actually.
Mm-hmm. All right. So how do you find yourself in Colorado?
I found myself in Colorado in '99 when I came out to work for an IT company.
Mm-hmm.
And I was married to an American lady at the time. Married to a different one now. They say the first marriage is always for practice, right?
Speak for yourself.
We ended up settling in the U.S., and 16 years later, I'm still here.
Now, did your interest in the paranormal coincide with your career as a paramedic and volunteer firefighter, or did it happen before?
It predated it by many years. It's an interest that I'd always had. It's one of my lifelong passions, and it's kind of infiltrated most aspects of my life. But it seemed like a logical progression when the publisher was asking me, what ideas do you have for a next book? that I would consider what I did for a living and take that forward as a proposal.
And I mentioned in the preamble that if you gain the confidence, and in fact, you don't even necessarily need to know people in the healthcare profession that well. Maybe you're at a party, they have a cocktail, and many of them are willing, they're glad to impart this information about paranormal experiences they've had. I mean, nurses, doctors, you name it, anyone who works in a hospital.
Well, it's true of all professions, Richard, and I'll give you a good example from just last night. I have a job as a tour guide. I do ghost tours at the haunted Stanley Hotel in Estes Park.
Right.
The
Shining Stephen
Hotel.
King, The Shining, absolutely.
So I was conducting a late night tour last night, and I always like to ask the guests, hey, who are my skeptics? Who are my believers? And who's on the fence? So there was one gentleman that had seemed pretty skeptical, and I must have misread him. Because at the end of the tour, I was chatting to him, and I said, so, were you skeptical? Were you a believer? And have you changed your mind in the last 90 minutes? And he said, no, I walked in a believer because of where I work. I said, oh, do tell, where do you work? And he looked me in the eye and he said, I'm a mortician, and I've got stories that you would not believe. So I said, I've got to ask you, is this unique to your place of work, or when you guys get together, the morticians have trade conferences and hang out?
Right.
Do you all have these kind of stories? And he said, yeah, most of us have them.
Most. Fascinating, fascinating. But, and I also mentioned, it makes sense that if you're going ghost hunting, the place, the last place I probably would look would be a cemetery. And the first place would be a place where people are busy living and dying. And those would be hospitals and even prisons, and asylums and other institutions. And you obviously, did you come to that conclusion before you became a paramedic?
I think that wherever you find a lot of people living on top of one another, if you will, you find ghosts. So you look at places like prisons, hospitals, anywhere like that, you have a large amount of humanity. And in both those instances, emotions run high. Prisons are more negative emotions, of course. In hospitals, you have both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. You have the most joyous news in the world of new families with a child being born. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, sometimes just one floor up, you have lives coming to an end and a great deal of grief. And it's all packed into this relatively small amount of square footage.
All right, we will continue this conversation. The world's most haunted hospitals. If hospital walls could talk, what tales they would tell. Well, we'll tell some of them on the other side. Richard Estep, my guest, right here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Richard Estep is with us, paramedic, volunteer firefighter by day, paranormal investigator by night, the author of a number of books, including the Wellington Undead series, and his latest is The World's Most Haunted Hospitals, and that's what we're discussing. And some of these hospitals, and this, he has toured the world to uncover some of these locations. Some of them are now in total ruins or partially demolished, others completely demolished, whereas others are still functioning hospitals to this very day. Before we get into that, let me also put the call out to anyone working in the healthcare profession: nurses, doctors, paramedics, first responders, even police. If you have had an experience, a paranormal experience, would love to hear from you, and we'll make the phones available to you at 416-360-0740 in the Greater Toronto Area, 416-360-0740, and toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4740, 866-740-4740. Before we get into the hospitals, let me ask you, as a paramedic, have you ever had an experience inside an ambulance, a paranormal experience?
I have not. You might expect that would be the case, but nobody ever dies in an ambulance.
Nobody
I don't
ever
know.
dies. Well, I guess they're not legally declared dead in an ambulance. Is it like Disneyland? Nobody ever dies in Disneyland?
I hadn't heard nobody ever dies in Disneyland, but you're right, nobody is pronounced dead in an ambulance. Do you know why?
Because you have to have a coroner declare them dead. No?
Well, actually, paramedics can pronounce people dead.
Oh, okay.
However, we tend to either do that on the scene, or we tend to do that at the hospital if somebody stops, if somebody's heart stops en route. And the reason is that ambulances, of course, are extremely busy vehicles, and if somebody were to actually be pronounced dead in one, it would be out of service for most of the day while the coroner comes in and makes sure of the legal particulars of the case.
Oh, interesting.
Most folks tend to be pronounced on scene or at the opposite end of the right.
I didn't know that. And that this may be an urban legend, but the story is, again, nobody is allowed to be declared dead at Disneyland because obviously that would taint, the whole thing. And so they are flown out or driven out and legally declared dead outside of Disneyland proper. I can't swear by that. That may be an urban legend. All right. So, you traveled the world, and there's one other thing I want to talk to you about. And you mentioned the Stanley Hotel. Mm-hmm. Recently, I saw this on Yahoo News. There was a photograph, a tourist, I don't know if they were part of your tour. Someone snapped a photo. They were down in I think in the bar area, and there at the top of the stairs in this photo, the person didn't notice until much later, there is the figure of a woman, diaphanous, a partial apparition, but very clearly a woman at the top of the stairs. Have you seen that photo, and what do you think if you have?
Well, I'm very new at the Stanley. I've only been there for a couple of weeks, so it would not have been on my tour. But I can tell you that the hotel gets a large number of submissions of anomalous photographs from guests on a very regular basis. Some of them turn out to be easily explicable. Reflections, camera smears, insects, dust, those kind of things.
Right.
Others are harder to explain away. And the tour guides there, the experienced ones, will make a point of taking a look at them and seeing if they can find a conventional explanation. But they're not always able to.
All right. The most haunted hospital in the continental United States would be what, in your estimation, Richard?
Well, I kind of have a vested interest in this, in that it's the subject of an upcoming book. So I did try and visit as many of the hospitals in this book as I possibly could. And if I were an international jet setter with an unlimited budget, I would have visited them all. As it was, I wasn't able to do that, but I was able to talk to people that have been inside them all, pretty much. But here in the States, I was able to hit a number of the facilities. And I think my favorite one is the old Tooele Hospital just outside Salt Lake City in Utah. And when you look at the way this place is laid out, it is a former community hospital that closed down 2004, 2005, something like that. Now, the second half of the building at the back is still a retirement home. The buildings are connected, but they are separated by locking doors. And then to the right of them is the town cemetery. And what happened with this old hospital is it lay derelict for a few years and then was bought by private owners. And they did it with the purpose of making it a Halloween-style haunted house attraction. So if you can imagine, when the doctors, nurses, and staff upped and left for the last time, they left everything behind. And when I say everything, I mean the X-ray suite was left, the beds were left, all of the equipment in the emergency room, scalpels, you name it.
My, I don't know. That's kind of. Don't you think that's kind of distasteful? They want to turn that into a Hollywood, into a Halloween attraction, and it's still attached to a senior's home.
Well, there's a real division there of the folks in the care facility do not get into the haunted house attraction, and that facility is actually moving early next year. Okay. So I can see why some might think it's distasteful. But, let me give you the flip side of this coin. I ended up moving into that hospital for a week in Halloween of 2015. And most of the people that work there are kids that volunteer from the local community. So Certainly in a lot of relatively small towns, there aren't too many healthy things for the kids to do at night and at a weekend.
Right, right.
But a lot of the community has come together, and this is a passion project for them. They're immensely proud of it. They create characters, they audition, and the scariest characters that they can come up with make it into the haunted house.
Okay, you won me over. Now, did you move in there as part of an investigation?
I did, and here's why. I initially was writing Haunted Hospitals early last year. Started writing it in January, and it was published in January of this year. So I knew that I had to have the book finished by the summer. And so I'd heard about the old Tuella Hospital, and I contacted the owners and said, guys, do you mind if I bring a couple of investigators and perhaps spend a night or two there? So they said, sure, come figure out what's going on for yourself. So I liked that. There was no sales pitch. There was a come find out what you can. So we made the drive from Colorado, and it was 1,000 plus miles door to door each way. In total, 500 miles each way. That's a long night. So we drove out on the Saturday morning, spent the night there, went through their archive of EVPs and photographs and other evidence, and we were pretty tired and really didn't have a very active night at all. And I said, this hospital's great, but it has a scary reputation. It hasn't really lived up to it. And they said, well, Richard, here's the problem. This is abandoned for basically 8 months of the year. You came off season. If you were here in October, we have over 30,000 people coming through here, and they're getting the fright of their lives every single night. And that's when our ghosts are most active. Why don't you come back afterwards? I said, well, I've got to have the book in, but I would be interested in learning more about this case. It's a long way to come for a night. Will you let me have the keys for a week? Because to me, that's the real acid test, Are you willing to give this place up for a week and let me see what I can find?
Right, right.
And they had no hesitation. So I took a team of paranormal investigators, paramedics, and nurses. And we went out there for a week, beginning on Halloween night.
Are you sleeping in the old hospital beds?
So not quite. We took hotel rooms in the area.
Okay.
We worked in shifts. Yeah, there are some things even I won't do.
All right.
But we did spend pretty much every night in the hospital itself. And we would lock it up. We would seal it up. We wired the place for sound and for cameras, so we knew we were the only people in there. And after Halloween night, of course, we would wait for the guests to go home, the visitors, and then we would investigate the activity in the place. And it was immensely active. So it ended up getting its own book.
All right, so we'll look forward to that, but can you tease us a little bit? What did you see? What did you hear?
So perhaps the most fascinating thing, I had wanted very much to try an experiment I'd never heard of being done before. So I also teach EMTs and paramedics as part of my living. And we have these very realistic mannequins. They have functioning airways. You can put IVs in them. You can push fluids and drugs through them. So I was able to borrow one and some medical equipment, including a cardiac monitor. And on our road trip, we took this mannequin out with us. And we ran cardiac arrest simulations in the old emergency room. And the resident spirit in there that has been reported many times over is a physician, an ER doctor. And the mediums that have been through all tell a very similar story. They've said that this doctor is very much, it's my way or the highway. I don't tolerate fools, I don't tolerate incompetence, and I don't tolerate disagreement. You do it my way or we're going to fall out. So I got my crew together, and these are very experienced medical providers, and I said, I think we should do 2 cardiac arrest simulations. And the first one, we'll make sure that we run it like the Keystone Cops. Like everything is going to go wrong. We'll miss all of our IVs. We will get annoyed with each other. We'll start being snippy with one another and snarky. We'll see how the atmosphere goes, but nothing's going to go right. And then the second one will run perfectly, just as we would run a real cardiac arrest. So the idea was I would act as the physician for the first cardiac arrest, and then my colleague Jen, who is a senior paramedic, would run the second. So we run this first cardiac arrest, and oh, it's bad. I mean, we had people tripping over IVs and pulling them out of the arms. Nobody could get a drug dose right. If we could make it go wrong, we did. And we became very catty with one another. When we were finished, I pronounced the patient dead, threw down the stethoscope, and very theatrically slammed out of the doors in a huff. We took a break, and I realized I'd left my radio down in the security room. So I said, guys, I just have to go get my radio. And it's important to understand, Richard, that every door in this facility is wedged. They put a chock underneath it because it's bad form to have one close on a guest, a customer. It's a safety hazard.
Right.
So they chock them all open. I walk down to the security center, look at all the cameras. Nothing's moving in the entire hospital. I walk back, walk through this doorway, and I hear this almighty slam. And the door has been thrust as hard as possible against its hinges, 2 inches from my back. And it seemed like a very personal, very pointed, how dare you speak to your teammates like that, you horrible little man.
Right.
If you've ever been in an argument, Richard, where either you or the other person is so angry they've slammed the door as they left the room.
Right.
That was exactly what it sounded and felt like.
Was that caught on the security camera?
It was not caught on camera because that part of the hallway wasn't covered. This is a huge hospital, and you have to pick your spots.
Okay.
But we examined the scene afterwards, and the wedge had actually been pulled out and moved 4 feet away.
Remarkable.
So the chock had been pulled out. And so if you talk to my paramedic colleague Jen, she was actually my boss at the time, and she said, Richard, I've seen you in life and death situations. You've never even broken a sweat. Right now you're pale and you're shaking. Are you okay? And I said, well, the difference is, Jen, I've spent 20 years investigating cases like this. This feels very targeted and personal.
Yeah.
And so one of the nurses
came and
said, you made someone angry. I mean, that's the vibe we're all getting. You probably need to earn some forgiveness. So Jen talked to me and said, I'm happy to run this second simulation perfectly, but I think you should do it. And I think you should let whoever it is know that you are capable of running this like a professional with respect.
Right. Now,
and so that's exactly what we did.
So the second one went smoothly, and did you get a pat on the back from the great beyond, or what happened?
We didn't, but what I did, when we left, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I've never felt really this ridiculous, but I apologized to thin air, because I'm a big believer in not provoking, but this was more of an attempt to stimulate the energies in the environment.
Right.
And I wanted to let any spirits present know that no disrespect was intended to them. So I offered a very forthright apology and ate some humble pie.
And was that the end of it? I mean, was there any other activity, any EVPs, any orbs?
We got numerous EVPs. And one thing that's particularly fascinating is that most of the, shall we say, darker activity takes place in the older wing of the hospital. But there is one particular hallway where shadow figures are very active. We were engaged in a spirit box session with an SB-11. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I know, for example, like Frank's box, these two-way radios. They're sometimes called Frank's box. So that's what you were handling, one of these. And this is where you scan very quickly in between channels on a radio. And basically you're hearing a lot of white noise and static and so forth. The idea is, I guess, the spirit can somehow manipulate the little snippets of voices and form sentences. Is that the idea?
That's exactly the idea. Now, we found that we were getting some very abusive comments coming through the box directed towards one of our female nurses. And this is not a lady you want to push around. So she stood her ground, having a very strong character and personality like most nurses do. But some very, shall we say, lewd suggestions came through the box.
Hmm.
And another thing that was really interesting was that we had a voice coming through that was mocking my English accent.
Wow.
And that kind of disturbed a few of the people present.
That was one snarky doctor. Listen, Richard, stay put. We'll come back, continue to talk about the world's most haunted hospitals. We have a caller on the line waiting, Carl in New York City, who is he a doctor, Ian, did you say? Or he's a healthcare, he works in a hospital. Anyway, Carl in New York City with a story as well. Stay with us, The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Serra. Thanks for hanging out.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Serra's Strange Planet.
All right, welcome back. And if you'd like to get in on the discussion about haunted hospitals, asylums, other institutions, if you're a healthcare professional, you work as a first responder, paramedic, firefighter, what have you, and have a paranormal story to share, we make the phone lines available to you now at 416-360-0740, 416-360-0740, toll free from out of town, 866-740-4740, 866-740-4740. Richard Estep with us, the world's most haunted hospitals, and Carl has been waiting. He's in New York City and works in a hospital. Carl, welcome to The Conspiracy Show.
Good evening, Richard. I've worked in several institutions. Worked in attached to a psychiatric hospital, and I am an engineer. I'm not a healthcare professional. I take care of the building systems.
All right.
Working downstairs in the powerhouse for an old psychiatric center, working on a pump with a technician, we looked up, we saw a man walk right through the wall, just like he was walking around looking at the equipment. And we both saw it.
Hmm.
And I've actually gotten pictures of, like the Hat Man, like a shadow Hat Man.
Right.
In 2009, the day after Christmas, I took a picture, and there are 3 distinct figures in that picture. And I've actually had them where they've actually saved me. I had a steam leak, and there was a figure holding the steam off him. You could see the shadow of the figure in the steam. I wasn't getting burned, and it was steam that was so high pressure it could have cut you in half.
Wow. So you've had numerous incidents
Yes.
or occurrences with these apparitions.
Yes.
Are you able to name the hospital? Or?
I would prefer not to.
Okay. No, fair enough. I respect that.
I also work at another. I've been to several different facilities through my years. And the current one, the old part of the hospital, the pictures of the old doctors move on the walls. You go down the hall, the pictures turn sideways or tip on the wires, like off-center. Then you come back, and they're straight, or they're the other way, but they're, it's like somebody playing with them.
Right. That's me in the afterlife, because I'm a picture straightener. Now, it drives me crazy. So that's me on the other side, if that fate awaits me. So let's get Richard Estep in here, and I'm curious about a remarkable story, Carl. Thank you for that. These apparitions saving him from a steam leak. And photographic evidence to boot, he says. Would love to see those pictures, Carl. If you have them on a JPEG, you could send. I don't know if you're at liberty.
I don't. They're actually in a cell phone. I took them with a cell phone camera.
Well, you could certainly save that as a JPEG and send it.
I'll try to send it to you, Richard Serra. It's AM 740.
No, go to my website, strangeplanet.ca. There's a contact page there.
Okay, because I'd sent a picture to one of your guests before and never heard anything when you were talking about the Hat Man.
I tell you what, send it to me in care of, through this email, Richard Serrett, S-Y-R-E-T-T, Richard Serrett, okay. The number 1, at gmail.com. Richard Serrett 1 at gmail.com.
I will do that.
Looking forward to it. Carl, thanks for that great story.
Thank you.
All right. Richard Estep, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a terrific story. And, I always love when a witness does not want to identify their location. Carl's obviously not looking to get famous. He's not trying to identify his facility. He has no reason to make this up.
Right. Well,
So, these are the kind of credible witnesses that I talk to day in and day out.
Well, when he sends that picture, and I'm assuming he will, I'll share that with you.
Please.
And then maybe the two of you could, if that hasn't been covered in this book, that wherever that asylum or hospital is, maybe, this could be in the second volume. I want to talk about this abandoned hospital it's an air base in the Philippines, that just has people so terrified they just won't go there.
And that's the old Clark Air Base Hospital in the Philippines.
Right.
Yeah, so it's abandoned now. And it's hard to realize because that entire area was covered in volcanic ash. It's one of the reasons that the base was shut down. But at its time, the inception of the hospital during the height of the Vietnam War, it was a state-of-the-art hospital facility. And it met the needs of thousands of American service people, including their spouses and children. You had a lot of American military kids born there. And it was a medical wonder during the day. But Clark was one of the first stops, usually the first stop, for wounded servicemen coming back from combat in Vietnam. So you had this continuous stream of deeply traumatized, both physically and emotionally, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines coming through that facility. And it's around that time that the first ghost stories started getting recorded.
Did you travel there?
I was not able to do that. But I talked to a friend of mine who is an urban explorer who has been boots on the ground inside Clark. And another friend of mine who's with Ghost Hunters International, Barry Fitzgerald. And he spent the night in there when they were filming an investigation. And I talked to him, and it's kind of interesting, the disparity between the two. Robert Joe, the urban explorer, he said, it's a creepy location, but the atmosphere wasn't that bad. And I think what most haunts this area is psychological. On the other hand, Barry Fitzgerald said that he had such extensive activity in there, I couldn't write him a big enough check to spend one more night in that building.
Isn't that interesting? Now, the discrepancy, does it have more to do with the psychological, physiological makeup of the investigator, or just happenstance? We'll discuss when we come back. We'll take a time out, but I'll ask you more about Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines and why the discrepancy between two investigators. Richard Estep is with us. The world's most haunted hospitals. True life paranormal encounters in asylums, hospitals, and institutions. We have more waiting on the other side. Join us.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet.
Richard Estep is with us, paramedic, volunteer firefighter by day, paranormal investigator by night, and his latest is called The World's Most Haunted Hospitals, True Life Paranormal Encounters in Asylums, Hospitals, and Institutions. And we were talking about this abandoned hospital, an abandoned U.S. base, Army base in the Philippines. Two separate investigators went there, and again, this is where returning wounded soldiers from the Vietnam conflict would come en route back to America, and obviously a great deal of mental, physical, emotional anguish would have been present at that hospital, and abandoned because of some volcanic activity in the area. So two separate investigators went there with two different stories. One said, really not a lot of activity going on. The other one was absolutely horrified, couldn't wait to get out of there. Now, does that have more to do with the investigator and their physiological, emotional state, or does it have to do with mere happenstance? One went there for whatever reason, there wasn't a lot of activity. The other went there and there was more activity.
Well, I think it's important to make the distinction that the gentleman who said that he felt quite comfortable there was an urban explorer. So his whole thing is that he likes to find these out-of-the-way abandoned places and explore them. He is not looking for anything paranormal, whereas, of course, the paranormal investigator is. So you make a great point, Richard, that I think that we have predisposition here. If you are going to a location that you're told or believe is haunted, you're more likely to react to everything that seems potentially out of the ordinary. You're more likely to think it's paranormal. And it's very easy for me, as I'm doing the interview, to kind of armchair quarterback. But he was the guy that put boots on the ground, and stayed there all night, and was telling me about the fact that a couple of the investigators nearly came afoul of some poisonous snakes. It's a very creepy environment.
Sure. And dangerous.
Yeah, very much dangerous. And there are holes in the floor that will take you down into the basement to easily break a bone and so on and so forth. But I think that we're all certainly predisposed in a haunted location to expect to see ghosts. And what I find most fascinating is, does it make us more likely to misinterpret something as being paranormal? Or does it make us more open to the genuinely paranormal?
That's a
debate that we could have all night.
Right. It is a great question. And I genuinely believe that some people are just wired a little differently so that if we were talking about a spirit world that's based on vibrations, vibration rates, then I believe some people are simply wired to be able to perceive those and some are not.
I think that there's a lot of truth there. And one thing that fascinates me is that when you look at cases where, let's say you have a large bunch of people, 20, 30 people, and they're in a historic location, like say Hampton Court in England, Henry VIII's old palace.
Right.
And you'll hear 5 or 6 of these people see an apparition, and the majority of the group does not. What is it about those 5 or 6 people that made them able to experience the ghostly when the others didn't? Is it the way that their brains work? Is it genetic? Is it some biological factor? Is it psychological? Is it just that they were more attuned, as you said, to those vibrations? We still don't know how people see ghosts. In fact, seeing may be the wrong word entirely. In fact, I sometimes wonder if we don't perceive them in an entirely different way.
Right. Now, not the urban explorer, but the other, the paranormal investigator that went to Clark Air Force Base. What did he experience?
Well, Barry went with the team from Ghost Hunters International, and they had a very busy night. They found the basement to be extremely active. They were seeing shadow figures down there. They're hearing footsteps all around in this deserted building. They're hearing all kinds of whispers and other noises. And it was extremely active for them.
All right. You mentioned England, Hampton Court. I want to talk about St. Thomas Hospital in London. And it's not necessarily the hospital grounds we're talking about, but there's a bridge sort of adjacent to the hospital where people have seen apparitions. For generations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting you should bring this up. So St. Thomas's Hospital is one of London's oldest, and it sits directly across the River Thames from the Houses of Parliament. And the bridge that separates them both has long been renowned to be haunted. And just on a quick tangent, I just watched it explode today. I was in the movies checking out the new Captain America movie.
Oh, is that right?
I saw the trailer for the Independence Day sequel.
Right.
And I watched them blow up St. Thomas's, the Houses of Parliament, and that bridge.
There you go. So,
but yeah, that whole part of London has its ghost stories. The Thames being no exception, and the ghost of a barge has been seen that always comes downstream, passes under the bridge, and never comes out. But also the spirit of a suicide that has been seen jumping into the waters, and a number of men have gone in after this particular suicide in an attempt to rescue her, and are never able to find her.
There's another hospital in London, I don't know if it's St. Thomas's, but there's a ghostly nurse in grey who has frightened generations of nurses and doctors. That is St. Thomas's. That is St. Thomas's. Tell us about the grey nurse ghost.
Well, what's interesting is, I don't know that she's scaring them. A friend of mine actually encountered her. And she's famous. The ghost, not my friend.
Okay.
So the deal with St. Thomas's is, it's where Florence Nightingale began her first nursing school.
Ah.
So it's believed by many that the Grey Lady is Florence Nightingale's ghost herself, which I think is extremely cool.
Nothing sinister then about her. She no, looking over
and
people.
I think that when you look at some of the ghosts of nurses and physicians, in reality, these are very caring people. I think that healing is a calling, not just a profession. And it's amazing to me researching this book how many of them are still on duty years after their deaths, you know?
Right.
It's almost as if that desire to minister to the sick doesn't leave, and that their spirits might perhaps stick around.
There's an interesting distinction, types of ghosts. There's the ghost that seems to be kind of an echo. The ghost is seen in the same spot at a certain time, coming down and descending the stairs, almost as if there is no consciousness there. A residual. And then there are ghosts that seem to have consciousness. They're interacting. They're leaving EVPs. They're leaving lewd remarks on Frank's box. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that distinction. I mean, what type of ghost is more common?
And you raise a great point, Richard. And we tend to use the word ghost as a catch-all. You know, we tend to mean the spirit of dead people. For the most part, if we say ghost, that's what we mean. But in reality, I think it's more of an umbrella term. And I think it encompasses a spectrum where at one end, you have something that is no more intelligent than the image on my TV screen tonight when I'm watching Gotham. You know, it just replays over and over again. These are events that happened a long time ago and have somehow been recorded on the environment. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have these entities which are able to interact with the living, you know, both physically. The Grey Lady, for example, has brought drinks to dying patients when they're thirsty at night, has done the job of a nurse, and can actually manipulate their environment. So I'm not sure we're entirely dealing with the same thing. The poltergeist is something different again.
And which type of ghost have you had the most experience with?
I think the majority of cases that we're called in to investigate are intelligent or seem to be intelligent. The residual ones tend to be found at locations where you've had a very traumatic event, or someone has loved the environment very much. Let's say, for example, they haunt their favorite house because they were very happy there during their lifetime. So somebody spends 30 years in a house that they love. They somehow imprint their image there like a natural recording. And then the susceptible can come back and, for want of a better term, replay that tape, you know?
Richard Estep is with us. The book is The World's Most Haunted Hospitals, True Life Paranormal Encounters in Asylums, Hospitals, and Institutions. Just have about 2 minutes. Just give us a little taste of the story. It's this Italian island, and it's referred to by locals as the gateway to hell. This has to do with plague victims.
It does. Poveglia Island, just off Venice. Are we going to talk about that now?
Just to give us a hint of it, because we have about a minute and a half here.
We're looking at a location which was a burial and dumping ground for the corpses of victims of the Black Death off the coast of Venice. And there are some pretty hairy legends that go along with that, to the point where the locals will still not take boats out to Poveglia. And the police actually have it cordoned off.
Is that right? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Are you itching to go there? Do you have a burning desire to visit?
I wouldn't have been able to go there, at least not legitimately. But people shall we say, have a reputation for bribing locals to drop them off and then come pick them off the next day.
Right. And
if I could do it legitimately, I'd spend a night there.
Do you know any investigators that have made it there?
The guys from Ghost Adventures spent a night there, and it was an extremely active night, and I don't think they would go back.
Wow. Well, that's saying something. When you scare off an investigator, someone who does this for a living, you would think they would relish an opportunity to go back. And when they swear up and down, that's it. I'm hanging up my ghost hunting coat or whatever. You know, you've found you found a hot spot. Well, Richard, thank you so much for this, and we look forward to your upcoming book on this hospital in Salt Lake City. And good luck on all future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard.
The World's Most Haunted Hospitals, Richard Estep. Let me spell the last name for you. E-S-T-E-P, if you want to Google that and find out more about Richard. And we've also linked up to his website on mine, to strangeplanet.ca, and find the radio page. It's all right there. Thank you to Ian Robertson, Albert Vinzel, Jonathan Franz, back next week with a brand new show. Let's see, Bob Mitchell, ufologist Bob Mitchell, be with us. That should be good. Victor Vigiani, of course, in studio as well. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Hey, thanks for inviting me into your home. I have to tell you, I'm still reeling from my conversation with Dan Ricken last night on Coast to Coast. Dan is the host of the Daily Planet on Discovery Canada, and he's a biologist. He loves bats, vampire bats in particular. So I'm not sure if you caught Coast last night, but Dan has this new book out called Mother Nature is Trying to Kill You, and in it he sort of pokes around into the dark side of the animal world. So much, that when we hear about nature and the animal kingdom, there's a lot of anthropomorphizing going on, and aren't animals all wonderful, and isn't nature grand, and if we could only get back to the garden and so forth. Well, Dan sort of lays that bare in this book. I mean, he loves nature, and he's totally turned on by, even the darker realms of the animal kingdom. But we had 3 hours kicking around some pretty amazing conversations about, we talked at length about the mating habits of spiders, if you can believe it, and how the female usually ends up eating the male during copulation. And we talked about forced copulation in the animal kingdom, in the duck world. I mean, how else can I describe it? There is, again, this is anthropomorphizing. It's called forced copulation, but it's kind of a rape culture in the duck world. And now I'm thinking, I'll never look at a male duck again the same way. They are not the cute little, adorable little, the Affleck duck or goose that we see on TV. And to think, when we come to those duck crossings, and I slam on the brakes whenever a duck crosses the road, and now I'm asking myself, why am I doing that? Those male ducks are real SOBs. And don't get me started on what happens to the poor female bedbug during copulation. It's heartbreaking. Yes, pity the female bedbug. I'm going to get Dan Riskin on this program real soon. Season 3 of the Conspiracy Show television program is, of course, well underway. Monday nights on Vision TV, 10 p.m. Eastern. In our next episode, The Water Engine. Stanley Meyer posted several YouTube videos a number of years ago which appeared to show him operating an internal combustion engine on just water. And in fact, he claimed his water engine powered a dune buggy across the United States. And then, of course, Stanley Meyer died quite suddenly and under rather mysterious circumstances, and some say he was assassinated by agents working for Big Oil. So that's this week's episode, The Water Engine. And after you watch it, don't forget to log on to theconspiracyshow.com, which is our interactive website where you can discuss, debate, vote. And good news, we're the Conspiracy Show television program now in the U.S. Season 1 is now being televised in about 110 markets in the U.S., and it's growing. And we're getting some terrific response down there. In fact, just got some results, some data. We're number 1 in Albuquerque and number 2 in Houston in our time slot. Very quickly, I also want to mention our good friend, Dr. Douglas James Cottrell, remote viewer, intuitive, medical intuitive, Canada's Edgar Casey, no stranger to this program. He was just on, was it last week or the week before? He's got a miracle transformation event happening. Saturday, October the 4th. That's coming up this next weekend. Saturday, October 4, 1:30 to 5 p.m. in the Wellesley Room, Holiday Inn, downtown Toronto. The Wellesley Room, Holiday Inn, Saturday, October the 4th, 1:30 to 5. And that's 30 Carlton Street in Toronto between Yonge and Church. And here's the number. If you want to pre-register, you call 905-393-5104. 905-393-5104. Miracle Transformation Event on our good friend Dr. Douglas James Cottrell. All right, we are going to talk paranormal for the next hour, and how. And it may be the most notorious and most terrifying poltergeist haunting of recent decades. It's called the Bridgeport Poltergeist, and it was seen and heard by thousands of people on one unforgettable day back in 1974. And one of the local youngsters who was sort of following the remarkable events unfold as it was covered by the local media was a then 10-year-old boy by the name of William J. Hall, and he remembers every detail, and who wouldn't? And William would grow up to become a magician and a well-known investigator of the paranormal and the unexplained. In fact, he wrote a syndicated column on those very subjects for many years in Connecticut. And Bill Hall is with us tonight to share never-before-reported interviews of the first responders and other witnesses and previously unrevealed documents and reports. And it's all detailed in a journalistic new book entitled The World's Most Haunted House, The True Story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. Bill Hall, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Delight to have you with us. So take us back. 1974, you were 10 years old. Now, first of all, how big a town is Bridgeport?
It's a good-sized city. It's nowheres near anything like Chicago or anything like that. So I'd probably put it in the mid-size range. And this was a very tiny house downtown. So. And
did you know of the house prior to the events that unfolded on that day in 1974? Had you passed by the house? Were there rumors about this house prior to the news coverage?
No, not at all. No. The first many of us heard of it was, of course, on TV, as the story not only hit locally, but then soon virtually went around the world. I mean, Israel, Japan, Australia, Canada, in your backyard, I mean, everywhere. So it was one of those stories that just got so much more public and spread so much farther than these things usually ever do. It was kind of like the Roswell of haunted houses, if you will.
Right. So you're 10 years old at the time. Take us back and the circumstances under which you saw the news coverage and became involved in this story.
Well, there's two parts to it. When I was 10, I saw it on TV and I asked my dad, is it real? And he said no. And that was kind of the end of it for me. I was, of course, fascinated by it, but that was about it. And, many years later, even when I was writing, the news column, Magic in the Unknown, by then I had kind of forgotten about it and never really looked into it in any sort of depth, until I was having my coffee, doing what every intellectual does, reading the Wall Street News. It might have been Facebook, though. Yeah, it was Facebook.
Wall Street Journal sounds better. Let's go with that.
I know, right? Yeah. And somebody said, does anybody remember? It was on one of those community papers, in the community fan pages. Does anybody remember the haunted house on Lindley Street? And that's when it occurred to me, geez, I never really looked into this thing, and so I went online and started looking into it. And after about 50 newspaper articles, I was convinced that, no matter what happened, real or not, that there had to be a heck of a story in here. It was at least worthy of investigating. So that's when I wrote down all the names of all the people mentioned in the paper, police officers, firefighters, reporters, neighbors, onlookers, all the people that were mentioned, priests. And that's when I started calling. Of course, many of them no longer with us, but I happened upon rather quickly, in fact, police officer Joe Tomic, who was a first responding police officer, and after interrogating me like he was back on the job, he opened up and actually told me some things that he never confided in the police report or the news back then. And he had mentioned that he was forced to be interviewed after it was called a hoax. A few days later, after it really hit, big time in the press. And he said, I don't know why they set up a conference room with the police department. They forced us to be interviewed, and there was a big investigation. He said, if you can find those people who did that, he said, then you'll find out what really happened.
Okay, so let's take us back to that day, Bill. This is 40 years ago. This is half a lifetime ago, and there are people listening who have no idea what happened in 1974 in Bridgeport. So how were the news, as the news reports were coming out, what were they saying? What happened on Lindley Street?
Well, the high level overview of it was a tiny little house, 738 square feet, real tiny. And it was mother and father, Laura and Jerry Gooden, and their little daughter, Marcy, who was 10. And when they had all this activity happen, they ended up on the porch hysterical, and they ended up getting the attention of their neighbor and good friend, who also was a Bridgeport police officer, who came over and saw chairs opening and closing and some crazy things happening. And he didn't know what to do, so he called for backup. He was off duty at the time.
Sorry, let me just jump in. You said chairs opening and closing. You mean like recliners?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, those heavy 1970 recliners were opening and closing in the living room on their own, and as well as some other things like the refrigerator moving and so of course he thought they were broken into when he first went in there, and he didn't know what to do, so he called for backup, and 4 police officers came in 2 cars. They didn't know what to do, so they called the fire department. The fire department came. Actually, it was 12 firemen that came, 10 firemen, 2 chiefs. They came. They didn't know what to do, so they called the chaplain at the fire department, and they went and got the priest and brought him there, and he basically told them something evil's here, something's not right, and so it just kept escalating. And of course, then as word gets out, between picking it up on the radio and all of the people start gathering with all these police cars and fire engines, and then of course word quickly gets around with all these witnesses seeing things.
Yeah, then it's pandemonium. Listen, Bill, we're going to take a time out. Stay put. We'll come back on the other side. Continue to delve into the true story of the Bridgeport poltergeist on Lindley Street. William J. Hall was then 10 years old, but he's now documented never before reported interviews of the first responders and other witnesses and previously unrevealed documents in a new book, The World's Most Haunted House. Back with more on The Conspiracy Show right here. My name is Richard Serra.
The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Serra's Strange Planet.
Oh, also, wanted to mention, if you go to followthetruth.tv, our website for the Follow the Truth, the Conspiracy Show Summit happening November the 16th in Oshawa, hosted by yours truly, we've posted, as we do every week, a special question on that website. Again, followthetruth.tv, find that question. Do a little research, won't take you long. Come up with the answer to that question, and call Tim, my producer, here in studio, 416-360-0740, 416-360-0740, 0740 or toll-free 1-866-740-4740. If you've got the answer, you'll walk away with a pair of tickets to Follow the Truth, the Conspiracy Show Summit. In fact, we'll take the first 2 callers with the correct answer. You'll each win a pair. Okay, back with William Hall, the author of The World's Most Haunted House, and we're talking about this poltergeist activity that took the world by storm back in 1974. Thousands of witnesses, independent witnesses, saw furniture flying around in this tiny little house on Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And let's talk a little bit about the owners, Gerard and Cora Gooden. William, give us some insights into who these people were, because this just wasn't one sort of isolated incident. There were repeated calls for help from this couple, correct?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Actually, the Laura and Jerry only called the police in 1971 and 72. It was they called their friends when this stuff really started, and then got the attention of the neighbor, the police officer, John Holsworth, who he ended up calling for backup, as well as the friends called the police. So the Goodens actually never called the police. The famous ghost hunters from the Conjuring fame now, the Warrens, were also called in, not by the Goodens again, but by a neighbor. So they really didn't know what to do other than call their close friends. But they really were kind of the perfect couple as far as their integrity and everything. They were middle-aged at the time. Jerry was an altar boy. He was a Boy Scout leader when he had no children of his own. They were just known to be good salt of the earth people. He was a maintenance man at the factory, just not a head in the clouds kind of guy at all. They didn't even believe in anything supernatural or paranormal. They didn't, of course, as the stuff went on, they obviously had to face it and had all sorts of theories and questions, just trying to find out what it was. But so that's who the family were as people. They were just known to be generous, down to earth, and not the kind of people who would get involved in any sort of hoax or anything like that, which of course everyone knew it wasn't, especially the numerous police officers that were in and out of the house, as well as others.
Now, so. Were news crews on the scene able to capture any of this poltergeist activity, this furniture flying around on film?
No. There were news people that witnessed it happen, but the stuff really kind of happened very quickly. So there was a Bridgeport Post reporter there. There were, of course, radio people there that wouldn't apply there. But there were TV stations there that interviewed the family and that kind of thing a little bit. Some they let in. They didn't like the publicity, but because it was already there, they did want to get the word out that they weren't crazy. That was kind of the mission of that, because now they're this center of attention here.
And the fact that it's being witnessed by thousands of people. So are onlookers on the street able to see this poltergeist activity from their vantage point on the street, or are strangers traipsing through their house watching this stuff?
There were people who saw it on the street, particularly not only through the windows, but there were these 2 cement planter swans that they had on their porch that were seen moving on their own accord by a number of people in the crowd there. And there's a lot of people who walked away telling that story, and of course I came upon some of those witnesses, as well as the police would complain that the swans were making these guttural sounds, which I'm sure the swans weren't making it, but you know how you attribute the audio phenomena to whatever is closest nearby. But the swans were a big thing that they saw, as well as, some of them, of course, did look through the window. Actually, some of them did try to go in every once in a while, somebody would try to go in the house or even get by the police, and then they'd have to be escorted out. So it really got to be a crazy mess with all those people.
I mean, that must have caused, one would think, pandemonium, like mass hysteria. If you're sitting there watching this, these stone sculptures moving around of their own accord and making these guttural sounds and furniture flying around, I mean, that must have caused mass hysteria.
Yeah, I mean, there were arrest maids, they had dogs there, and paddy wagon, patrol cars, police. They had the barricade, the road closed. It was really crazy, and then it really, when the superintendent of the police force there at the time really culminated to head when 3 guys tried to burn the house down while the family was in it, and that's when the hoax story came out after that. They said we've got to. With all this stuff going on, they had feared that they were already making arrests, but they had feared that this thing was just something really bad was going to happen. It was already, of course, making the superintendent look bad with all these police resources and these people. The longer it goes on, the more people come, and from farther away they come, and the more news media comes, and of course once Associated Press and Reuters was there, it was game over, so to speak, So.
And how were the major news gathering organizations handling this story? Was it with sort of a tongue-in-cheek treatment, or was it were they covering it seriously?
They ultimately covered it seriously, but most of them went into it with a tongue-in-cheek attitude until they got in and realized what was going on. 2 guys from WNEB radio, local radio station at the time, went in and they thought they were going to have a good old time with it, and they were going to take some interviews, and it was just going to be a real fun thing. And about 5 minutes after, one of the guys said, in the testimony that he gave, he said, we never took our recorders out. We left the house. He said we had absolutely nothing to do a story on, and we didn't know if we even wanted to do a story. So a lot of the press, that's how they were reacting. Another reporter was in there from the newspaper, and he saw a thing of dishes fly across and make a turn on the counter, and it shocked him greatly, and he felt really bad for the family. So they were having difficulty with this job of having to report this, and of course, back at the station and the newspaper offices, they of course wanted to make it entertaining, sensationalized, and all that stuff. And these reporters were really facing the fact that this was a really serious situation with people who are really suffering. So that's a good question. They did go into it with that kind of tongue-in-cheek approach, and then quickly realize that this really was a sad and difficult situation.
And I understand that several police reported. The police are reporting seeing the kitchen refrigerator rise about a foot off the floor, and others said they witnessed a 21-inch portable TV set float above a table, then rotate clockwise in the air. Have you corroborated that?
Yes, and that's the amazing thing about this case, is the documentation from the investigation is so unheard of, because some of these things that were witnessed by 3 or 4 police officers as well as firefighters, each of them were interviewed separately, describing. So you'd have 6 or 7 people describing the same event separately, not only on audio, but also with the positions of where everybody was in the room, written down on an incident sheet, one incident sheet for every incident that anyone gave an interview or testimony on. So the kind of documentation in this case was unheard of. But yeah, the refrigerator floated. That was seen by 4 policemen as well as others. I mean, priests saw it happen. The young seminarian Paulino, who was there, saw the refrigerator float. Electrical inspector and a plumbing inspector that was called into the house, because of course they were checking for all the usual things. Yeah, I mean, they saw, and the police didn't run away. I mean, they tipped the fridge, they looked under, they looked on top. One went to the basement, looked at the ceiling. They really tried to, come to grips with this, this unknown things happening.
As a 10-year-old, Bill, as a 10-year-old, did you go by the house? Do you remember?
No, I did not. No. And I really would have no way to unless my parents drove me by it. And my dad was not, he just was not open to that kind of thing. Matter of fact, I have to commend him because he's reading my book, which is a big stretch for him. He's actually entertaining that this thing may be true just because of all he's heard about it, from me, because I played him some of the things and I said, well, yeah, listen to this interview. And he is at least fascinated by it. And, that's the most I can ask, because he's, of course.
Was it the idea that the police got together and decided that they're going to declare this as a hoax simply because they wanted to calm everybody down? Because, as you say, there were people trying to burn this house to the ground with the family inside. Is that what happened?
Well, it's interesting what happened. An inspector was brought into the case very late in the game, Inspector Clark, by the superintendent, and the superintendent told the inspector, "You need to shut this down." That was the instruction. I don't care how, you need to shut it down. Got to stop. Meanwhile, Tuesday morning, so these events happened as far as publicly. I mean, they were going on before that, but publicly, it was a Sunday and a Monday were the 2 days that were really heavy activity, as well as the media was involved at that point.
In November of 74.
In November of 74, yes, thank you. And Tuesday morning, when they were having some activity and they called the police outside, "Please come help us," and they called for some other backup. And those officers that went in the house, they saw Marcy. Marcy was on there was a TV on the carpet in the living room.
This is their adopted child. Sorry, this is their adopted child, right? Marcy is the adopted child of the Goodins.
Yes, who's 10 years old at the time, and she sticks her foot out and hits the TV, and it spins, and police officer saw her do it and said, "Aha," and that was the beginning of. All the police at the very beginning suspected the child, because, I mean, that does happen, that sometimes the parents can't see, or they don't believe it's their own child, but then when an outsider comes in, it's very easy to see that it's, the child doing that kind of stuff. These guys who were in the house did not see any of the activity that occurred before. So this is the first time they were in the house. So, and they saw Marcy do that. And then Marcy was pretending to make her cat talk, which really didn't fool anybody, but there were all these reports of the cat talking too, which again was the audio phenomena. I don't believe the cat was talking. There were voices, there was footsteps, there was banging on the wall. There were all these things going on. And so they said, okay, well, Marcy did the ventriloquism with the cat. She kicked the TV, and she must have thrown the things off, the pictures off the wall and stuff. They didn't have to get into detail, because they didn't know what happened before, and they really weren't interested because, again, if I was them and I walked into what they did and saw only what they saw, that would be your natural conclusion. So, and then they reported that back to Inspector Clark, who knew it was real. I mean, he had all the tests, the witnesses and the police reports, and he had all that stuff on his desk. He knew it was real, and he didn't know what the heck to do with the case. And he gets this call from the guys on the scene saying, "Hey, we saw Marcy kick the TV," and he said, he's thinking to himself, this is an opportunity here. where I can do something with this and close the case. So they blamed it on Marcy and called it case closed. And in fact, that inspector told one of the paranormal investigators after Jerry Sulfan from Duke University said, "I'm sorry, Jerry. I did the best I could with what I had. I had to close it down."
All right, listen, Bill, I gotta take a break here. So we'll
sure.
We'll pick up on that when we come back. We'll discover that this activity did seem to start right about the time that the Goodins adopted this Marcy after the death of their own son. We'll get into all of that and much more as we discuss the world's most haunted house, the true story of the Bridgeport poltergeist on Lindley Street. William J. Hall, my guest, right here on The Conspiracy Show.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
William J. Hall is with us, the author of The World's Most Haunted House, talking about this remarkable, horrifying poltergeist activity witnessed by thousands, including police, firemen, and other first responders, at this little tiny house on Lindley Street. And the center of this poltergeist activity may have been centered around a 10-year-old adopted girl by the name of Marcia, who was actually a native girl from Canada. So there's your Canadian connection. And she was adopted by the Goodins after the family lost their son, who I believe was 7 years old at the time. Now, so this activity began after they adopted Marcia. I understand about a year earlier. She was around 9. She was home from school for about 6 weeks because of a back injury, and that's when this all started. Is that right, William?
Well, it actually started in 1968, shortly after they adopted Marcy, and she was about 4.5 then. But it was very, very slow, simmering kind of things, like the chair being in the wrong place. The things out of the corner of your eye. Nothing is big activity like what happened later, and then in what really started it all was every November they had these banging sounds on the inside and outsides of the walls. And it started in 1971, and in 1972, their police officer friend, Officer Holsworth, across the street suggested, why don't we record these sounds so that maybe the police or civil engineers can figure out, what they're from. So they recorded those sounds, and that tape was given to Ed Warren, and then Ed gave it to Boyce Beatty, the lead investigator on the Lindley Street case, and Boyce gave it to me. And those sounds are actually in the bonus section of the book where you can access and hear those sounds for yourself. So those sounds is what really started it. But you're right, as far as the big activities started after Marcy was, for about a year, she was picked on every day at school because of her olive skin. As you said, she's, Native American. And then, she got beat up, in the cafeteria at school by a boy and was home for about 6 weeks with her overbearing mother, who was very sheltering of Marcy because their little boy who died at age 6 that you had mentioned couldn't walk or talk or anything. He had cerebral palsy. And so they were kind of bringing Marcy up in the same kind of way. They were afraid she was going to get killed. And meanwhile, Marcy's very introverted, withdrawn to begin with. So all of this, enters your basic, poltergeist situation within the tension in the family and the young girl. And so, but that culminated in her 6 weeks of being at home. And after that period is when it really picked up into that explosion of activity.
You mentioned a seminary student who was there and witnessed some of these things, and this seminary student apparently performed the rituals of exorcism at the house, and there was a 22-page report prepared. And in that report, we could spend 3 hours just talking about what's in that report. There's made mention of a plastic crucifix that exploded from a wall in front of witnesses, and then this is the one that sends the shivers up my spine. The family cat sang jingle bells in a frightening, inhuman voice. Have you been able to get a corroboration on that aspect of the story?
Yeah, that actually was from Father Charbonneau, a priest that arrives with the Warrens in Paulino. And he had heard that as well as the Warrens. But there were many people, including police officers, that heard the audio phenomena and had attributed it to the cat. But there was there was a part I wanted to correct from something you said, and now I can't remember what it was.
Was it about the plastic crucifix, or I mentioned a plastic crucifix exploding? I mentioned
there was no exorcism ever done. But I believe in the police report there was, I think they said something about somebody had the power to perform exorcism, and that was all that was ever done there was, a house blessing, just to clarify that.
Good. Okay.
And they tried to get one, but of course that was the kind of thing that once it got so public, the church didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Sure. Now, when you're hunting down these first responders now, all these years later, 40 years later, did they want to talk about it? Were they hesitant? Is this something that they wanted to forget about?
I was amazed that there only was one police officer who refused to talk about it. And I had heard from his brother that, it really, really affected him, and he really didn't want to go public again about it. He did talk about it back then, and I had his interview from, 74, but he didn't want to really talk again. The guy at Barnes & Noble did tell me his daughter came in and bought the book for him, so I guess he decided he did want to read and find out everything that happened. That was outside, of course, when he was there. But other than that, I was amazed that everybody really was quite cooperative. Officer Joe Tomic took a few phone calls to warm up, and he shared more and more the more I talked to him, and then finally sent me the original police report that appears in the book. But yeah, I was surprised that people were so receptive, and for some it changed their life forever. For others, they said, they don't really think about it that much. It was, the way people are, it is amazing, because it's not like in the horror movies. People react with a whole range of emotions. And most of them were trying to, discover what it was, trying to deal with the unknown part of it. But, some of the most shocking things to me are the different ways that the entities appeared. And I would like to play you a real short audio, if that's okay.
We'll do that when we come back, Bill.
Okay.
And I'll also get you to talk about maybe some of the more revelatory interviews or conversations you had with some of these first responders all these years later. 40 years. Coming up, actually. 40 years after the poltergeist activity in Bridgeport, Connecticut on Lindley Street. William J. Hall is here to tell all in his explosive new book, The World's Most Haunted House. Back with more here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Bill Hall stays with us, the author of The World's Most Haunted House, going back 40 years to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and some absolutely horrifying poltergeist activity, much of it witnessed by thousands of people, police, firemen, other first responders. You had a piece of audio you wanted to share with us, William. First, set that up. What is this audio about?
This is Paulino was one of the few surviving major witnesses to this case, and he actually had an encounter with the entities. Actually, had a shoving match with them. There was 4 of them. And they were these gauzy-like figures, and he described to me like that you can see them kind of like you see when you light a match and you see that blurry, you could see the blurry section above the match. It was kind of that nature. And he was a 21-year-old seminary student at the time, and his job was to watch Marcy for two reasons. One is to protect her, and in the beginning to find out if she was, doing these things, which of course they quickly figured out it wasn't her. And this encounter with this entity really changed Paul's view of it. He had the old school demonology view of these things until he actually felt it, and it started changing his viewpoint that he didn't think that it was enough to really explain it. So I just want to play his interview when I connect it with him as he shares an encounter that he had not shared back in '74. He actually didn't talk about it for about 35 years. So here it is. It's relatively short, but I think it's a nice snippet here.
I don't know how people would take it. These things are supposed to be spirits that we believe they were demons, but the demons have anatomies and bone structures. I mean, I'm not a biologist. I couldn't really identify it. It was almost bird-like. The thing got around me and, threw the kid across the road.
So Paul had felt anatomy and bone structure in this thing, like he says, almost bird-like, these thin bones. And it really threw him for a loop with everything he was taught, about considering them as demons.
But they were malevolent. I mean, these things were malevolent. They wanted to do harm.
Well, and I wouldn't say that they're positives, certainly. But we could even say they're negative. I don't know if I would say that they're, and of course it's anybody's guess, because obviously there's a number of theories out there, but we don't really know what their motives were. I mean, we can say that in picking up and throwing Marcy that obviously they're evil or negative. But because there's energies involved here, we really don't know. We don't know if something's a reaction to something. But those actions do seem very deliberate and, like you said, malevolent. I try to think of all possibilities. But I don't know if you can say they're pure evil. It's
fair enough. But why on earth?
Especially with the crowd.
Sure.
Especially with what the crowd was doing.
Sure.
But,
Yeah, that's true. Who's the perpetrating the evil here? But why would the good ones stay in that house?
Well, they did a lot of things that you would do in that situation. So the first night, for example, they had their friend, police officer John Holsworth, stay overnight with them. There was another night that they were there that there was just a house full of people. So a lot of times they weren't alone. There were other times where, it came to a point where they had a bag packed. And, they had kind of a new normal where they had a bag packed, and when things were bad in the house, they would go over, to stay with family. There were other times that they would decide to stay at the house and just have Marcy go stay with family. So they really kind of mixed it up depending on what was going on in the house. They were told by, the Warrens and Father Charbonneau, that the way the poltergeist operates, that if they did move, this would follow them. So,
what happened to Marcia? What happened to Marcy? Where is she now?
Well, as far as we know, she was okay, and we don't know what okay means, but she was at least alive and okay as of a few years ago, and that confirmation comes from one of the witnesses who was actually a Boy Scout when Jerry was the Boy Scout leader, and the assistant Boy Scout leader was this gentleman's father. And this guy Dennis, his brother, was very close to Jerry, and he told him about Marcy's status, but he's dead now, so, of course he can't ask him what okay means. And at the time when it came up, he wasn't, of course, concerned enough to go into details. So,
but nobody knows where she is. No one knows where she is.
Well, we're told she's in Canada, so it's your job to find her. No.
All right. I would gladly take that on. All right. That's my assignment.
Well, that because she was from Canada, that it's quite possible she may be, with the tribe there or something like that. So, I mean, I did hire a private investigation firm to try to find her, so we know she's not in the U.S. From what I hear, Canadian records are a bit different, so it's, it's a little bit tougher and more expensive to track down. And,
sure,
not that I think she'd want to talk, but it would have been nice to say, okay, she's okay, or she has a family,
sure,
or, whatever.
How long did the Goodins stay in the house?
They actually lived there the rest of their lives, because what happened is after the phenomena had settled, they did try to sell the house, even though there was no more phenomena, and it wasn't because they were scared the phenomena was going to come back, but after the entities were dissipated and the activity stopped, they still didn't want to stay there because of the people. It was constant ridicule at work. It was tire slashing and the mirror on the car breaking and clothes being pulled off the line, and it was just people were just really tormenting them, and they wanted to get out of the city, but they tried to sell the house and couldn't. Probably more likely because of the size versus what happened there. You usually can find somebody who wants to buy a house that had that kind of activity.
There's a huge market. There is a surprisingly huge market for that sort of thing.
Now, I don't know if there was back in the 70s, but, when you have a house that's 738 square feet, that's a tough sell no matter what happened. And, they wanted, I think it was $31,000 for it, and it ended up selling in the year 2000 for, I think, 21. So, they had their money in it, so they had to get a certain amount, and they just couldn't sell it. So instead, they painted the house and got rid of the swans, and
sure,
tried to at least disguise it. Instead of disguising it, the new look hit the newspaper. So but
right.
But that's why they ended up staying there.
Now I've just got a couple of minutes here, Bill. So many things, so much to cover, so little time. You're a trained magician. So as a trained magician, I mean, were you going into the story trying to maybe prove that it was a hoax, knowing how, some of these effects could be manipulated, could be manufactured?
Yeah, I was thinking I was thinking it most likely was not real. I mean, I was open to it, but that was my thought. And luckily the interviews were done with such detail that I had the detail I needed in order to understand completely what they saw, not just what they interpreted that they saw, but, exactly what they viewed. And, because in the newspapers, you hear a refrigerator floated and that's what they perceive happened, but you don't hear the play-by-play of, what they actually saw, what lifted up first, how did it react, did it shake, was there rumbling, was there sound, all the questions.
Sure. And was there a moment when, whether it was during an interview with one of these first responders, that you can recall thinking to yourself, "Oh my God, this was real"?
Yeah, some of the most compelling testimony was by Father Charbonneau. Being a priest and describing, the formation of a shadowy figure is really compelling. But I must say, it really was the compounding effect of hearing police officer after police, 8 hours of police officer interviews, and after you hear so much of it, I think I guess like synergy, the total really was overflowing with evidence. But it took about 20 hours. I remember it being about at the 20-hour mark of listening to these interviews that I was at the 150%, it's real mark. because a lot of it you're like, well, it sounds good. Nothing tells me it's a hoax, but you're still not quite sure. You need more and more and more. And then finally you hit the mark and say, okay, well, I heard 8 hours of police interviews and I heard all these firemen. I heard the priest. And then it gets to a point where it's just, there's no question, especially with the type of things that happen. So
how did it all end? I mean, when did the poltergeist activity stop and under what circumstances?
Well, as I've learned, most of these things stop when some sort of peace and routine is restored to the family. So when Marcy was able to return to school, but a different school, she returned to Catholic school, which was not the rough kind of school that she was in before when she was beat up. Once she got back to school and got in her routine and was happier herself, and that's when the activity dissipated and never returned. And like I said, the family still tried to sell the house, couldn't, but because there was no activity, figured, okay, we can't sell the house, so they decided to stay there.
How did this change your life, if at all, Bill? Once you wrote this book, you came away a believer that all of this paranormal activity, this poltergeist activity, these demonic sounding voices coming out of the cat, perhaps. I mean, how did that change your life? It must have.
Oh, yeah, boy, I'll tell you, you said it, Richard. Yes, it did change my life. I felt kind of bad with not how strict, but maybe the way I viewed people who, although I had people close to me that had their own experiences, and I didn't think they were lying, but I didn't really know what to make of it, without having any sort of proof or context of it. It's difficult, but it did change my view of the world, and it's a much more magical place for real for me, and it's an exciting discovery. So I'm just really happy I'm in the place I am now, because now I have the eyes of a skeptic, but the realization that there are those true things out there.
Bill Hall, I appreciate your time. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. And my website's worldsmosthauntedhouse.com.
Also the name of the book, The World's Most Haunted House. Thanks again, Bill.
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Dear friends, thanks for inviting me into your home, and I do take that responsibility very seriously. My hope for you is that wherever you are safe, and you are warm, and you are well fed. Interesting, being someone on the radio, I don't get recognized a whole lot when I go out and in public. Occasionally people will recognize me from the television show. And I took the boys last week to an AHL hockey game, their first professional hockey game. The Toronto Marlies were playing the Hamilton Bulldogs. Went to the concession stand, and the person working the concession stand recognized me from the TV show. Then it happened a few nights later. The Mighty Aphrodite and I were out at a function. A couple of people recognized me, came over, and when I am recognized, people come over, and there are 3 or 4 things that they want me about or talk to me about. And depending on their age, the first category, it's either, who do you think really killed John Kennedy? And then they'll offer their opinion. Or maybe if they're a bit younger, they want to talk about 9/11 because that is sort of, the watershed moment for a particular generation. So there's that category. And then the other category is obviously, UFOs, huge topic. And they'll ask me if I've seen one, and I have not. And then they'll relate their experience. The other huge area, and this has happened probably more often than I can remember, when people come up to me at a party, at a function, and in a very quiet voice, they'll ask me about ghosts, and they'll tell me about their experience, having seen a ghost. and whether I have. And I have talked about it on the air a number of times, and I won't bore you with that story again. But that's the thing. You would be shocked. If you're in a crowded room, 20 to 30% of the people in that room have seen a ghost or believe they have seen a ghost. But it goes unsaid. People don't talk about it in public. They're afraid of the ridicule. They're afraid of being shunned by their peers or being perceived as a little loopy. And many of you know this. You've had an experience, but you don't go around broadcasting it. But if you only knew that the person sitting next to you at the bar or at the hockey game had a similar experience, I think you'd feel a little bit better. You'd be willing to open up a little bit more. 20 to 30%, I'm guessing. It might even be higher. Many of you also may be living in a house that you suspect may be haunted. Maybe you haven't seen an apparition, but maybe you felt something or you've heard something. Well, this next hour, half hour actually, is dedicated to you. We're going to talk about what makes a house haunted. Some of the things you're going to hear you already know, but some of the things may actually surprise you. What makes a house haunted? Rosemary Ellen Guiley is one of the leading experts on the paranormal with more than 50 books published by major houses on a wide range of paranormal, spiritual, and mystical topics, including 9 single-volume encyclopedias. Her work is translated into 15 languages. She's worked full-time in the paranormal since 1983, more than 30 years, researching, investigating, writing, presenting, and teaching. Her present work focuses on interdimensional entities, contact experiences of all kinds, technological and mediumistic spirit communications, spiritual growth and development problem, hauntings, and portals. And she joins us once a month on this program, and we're delighted to welcome her each and every month. Rosemary, how are you?
I'm doing well, Richard.
Now,
UFOs, I had a great time out in Arizona at the UFO Congress again this year. We missed you.
I know. I'm sorry I couldn't make it this year. I always have a wonderful time as well. And, I got to get there next year. Certainly with this weather, it would have been great to be in Phoenix in February. Lord knows.
Oh, my gosh, yes.
Now, I just threw that figure out, 20 to 30%. I'm probably lowballing it. But, have you seen any polling regarding, what's the latest polling on the number of people that have seen ghosts?
I haven't seen a poll in quite some time, and admittedly, I do deal in a skewed universe, so to speak, because most of the people I come in contact with in my work are dealing with haunted experiences and even problems. But I would reckon it's much higher. Haunting activity is very prevalent in the landscape, and certainly that affects the houses that we live in and the buildings that we work in. And sometimes the activity is very low level. We might not notice it a lot, maybe just occasionally, but I would probably say at least 50% of people have had some kind of haunting experience at some point.
50%, wow. Yeah, I was lowballing it then. I mean, I'm pretty conservative in everything, so I was being very conservative. But I'm guessing also, I mean, I know with, let's say, for example, the UFO phenomenon, probably, somewhere between 80, maybe 90, maybe even higher, 80, 90% of those probably have a more prosaic explanation. But it's that, 15, 20% that leaves you scratching your head. Would you say that it's the same in with ghosts and hauntings, that maybe 80% or more can be explained by some other more worldly explanation, not supernatural?
There are many cases that can be explained naturally, and of course, a good paranormal investigator is going to look for natural explanations first. Old houses, they have creaks. They often have very strange smells in them because odors get absorbed into wood and things like that. But a lot of times people will try and convince themselves that there are natural explanations for the things that go on, because contemplating the supernatural just becomes very uncomfortable for them.
Sure. Well, we're going to talk about, you've compiled a list of 8 reasons, the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted and what to do about them. And as you go down this list, there's a lot of reasons. And as you say, they don't have to be old houses. Brand new houses can be haunted, you're saying. How often do we find that new builds, as they're called in the industry, new builds are actually haunted?
I hear more and more from people who are living in very new places who usually they move in. They might be the first occupants. They might be in a house that's, say, 5 years old or 10 years old, and maybe one other occupant before them. And they have activity, and they have this idea that a place has to be old to be haunted, because that's a very popular notion that's been portrayed in films and in the media. And yet they can't explain what's going on. Increasingly, we're building on land that has energy in it. And there are spirits who live in the land. And if we put a house down on this energized land, the structure is going to be occupied by the invisible residents. As we go more and more into rural areas, places where human beings haven't lived before, this is happening.
And of course, we have the movie Poltergeist, which ended up being as a result of the house being built over an ancient Indian burial ground. Is that prevalent? Does that happen a lot, where a house is built over a burial ground or next to a cemetery, and then there's activity in the house?
It does happen, and sometimes people think that may be the reason. For example, that their house is located on, say, an old Indian burial ground. Well, people have been buried everywhere on the planet, and certainly in ancient times there weren't any formal cemeteries. So, in a sense, living things occupy the blood and the bones of the soil everywhere. But there are many cases where old cemeteries have been they aren't used anymore. They've been neglected, or we've pushed into areas that had been occupied by indigenous peoples, and we put up houses, and the dead don't seem to like that very well. There are many folklore traditions all over the world that disturbing the burial places of the dead creates havoc for the living. And yes, we do have many cases on record in the paranormal of people discovering that their building or their home has been placed over land that probably still has people buried in it. Sometimes old graves aren't relocated. Sometimes they're not entirely relocated, and those sorts of activities can take place. I can think of some places in West Virginia that I investigated. There was an entire street, for example, in downtown Fairmont, West Virginia, that it turned out had been built right over the top of old burial grounds from Indian people, and all of those buildings up and down the street had paranormal activity in it.
There you go. We're talking the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted and what to do about them. Rosemary Ellen Guiley is with us. Let's talk about item number 1 on the list. You call it residues, the leaving behind of residues or of energy.
This is the most common reason why places are haunted. And when we die, we leave behind these energy imprints. And it's like memories of our lifetime, imprints of our lifetime, imbued in psychic space. And actually things can leave behind these energy imprints too. We have such things as phantom buildings, and most often it's something like a person or an animal who leaves behind impressions from scenes in their lives, and usually they are related to highly charged emotional events. They might be unhappy, they might be happy. For example, if a person lived for a long time in a place that they absolutely loved, they might leave behind energy residues that sort of collect together and become like ghosts. People might see an apparition of that person, smells related to that person, like a favorite perfume or tobacco. These are very common phenomena that are very benign. That is, it's not an intelligent presence that is looking to scare people, although people are frightened by it. But it's the shadowy form that sort of is seen out of the corner of the eye, or is always in a certain area, footsteps that always go down a certain hall, noises that are always in a certain part of a house.
But these things fade over time, do they not?
They do fade over time. They have their own battery life, so to speak, and then how long they last depends on how strong they were to begin with. The living can help keep them alive. In fact, paranormal investigators can contribute to the lifetime of residues by paying attention to them and wanting to capture them.
That's fascinating.
Sometimes if there's certain energy in the land, that helps too.
All right, Rosemary, we'll take a time out. We'll come back and we'll continue to count down the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted and what to do about them. And for you, those listening, any of this sound familiar? I'm back with more of The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Welcome back. Just a programming note. Coming up at, just before the last segment of the show, basically, our media scientist Nelson Thal returns with another installment of State Psyops. Now, we've changed the name. If you're keeping track at home, it was previously called State Secrets, but we've hooked it up to a new Twitter account, and State Secrets was taken. So we're calling it State Psyops, and every 2 weeks, Nelson delivers news that you won't hear on the mainstream media. That's coming up a little bit later in the hour. Right now, Rosemary Ellen Guiley stays with us as we look at the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted and what to do about them. Rosemary, we were talking about residues. This residue of energy, which, if strong enough, it coalesces into imprints of images and sounds and smells and minor movement. And we were talking about how it can manifest itself. Apparitions, footsteps, the typical things that we associate with a haunting, tapping, knocks, distinctive smells, cool breezes, and so forth. What are the remedies? How do we get rid of these residues?
Sometimes, if they don't fade away on their own, doing things like redecorating or renovating can disturb the energy patterns, and oftentimes they'll just either suddenly go away or over time really start to decrease. There are other environmental things you can do, like doing a cleansing with incense or sage. Crystals are very good for rearranging the subtle energy inside a room. And I also recommend to people that they consult a feng shui expert. That's the art of placement, the use of mirrors and positioning of furniture and things like that. Again, you're looking to rearrange the energy patterns, the way energy moves through a house, and that will often take care of the problem.
Number 2 on the list of the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted is deaths, which, obviously makes sense. But as you point out, a house, you don't have to have had a death occur at the house for a haunting to take place.
That's right, and in fact, many people are puzzled by that. I'll hear from people and they'll say, I think my house is haunted, but I don't think anyone's ever died here, so how can that be? But oftentimes, deaths will leave, again, this residual imprint, and it may be a little stronger than just life imprints because dying is a major transition of energy, and if people have died tragically in a place, like through an accident, a fall, for example, or through violence, like a crime, or they've committed suicide, they've been murdered, they had a very unhappy, lingering death, that can leave very powerful residual energy, too. So the remedies for that sort of problem can be the same as just normal residues, renovation, redecorating, paint, move things around, maybe alter the structure a bit, like put a window in somewhere, something, again, to alter the energy. And if you can locate the specific place in the house where the most phenomena are occurring, that would be the place to focus on.
I've always found interesting, Rosemary, and for those people who I always bring this up with skeptics or non-believers, and the old saying, a skeptic is simply someone who hasn't had an experience yet. But I always say, if this stuff isn't happening, why is it part of real estate law that a real estate agent has to divulge to a prospective home buyer that a place is haunted?
Many people are disturbed by that, and some of those laws also relate to having to disclose whether or not someone has died in the house. people are kind of unsettled by that too. But we did have a famous case in New York State back in the 1980s where people bought a house in Nyack, New York, and it turned out to be haunted, and they wanted their money back. They wanted out of the deal, and it did go to trial. And some people would be very excited to live in a haunted place, but for most people, we don't like to be disturbed by things we can't explain that seem to be part of another world.
All right, and so the remedy, if a house, if someone has died in the house and it was especially tragic, or the result of an accident or a crime, or it was a painful, lingering illness that, as you say, could leave a scar on the psychic landscape, what are the remedies then?
You can do the residual remedies like the renovation, environmental cleansing, the crystals. And I think it's also important to do prayers for the dead, to help the dead be at peace. And that seems to affect some of these residues as well.
Saturday of the Souls. Right. That's a good time to do it.
Absolutely.
Earthbound souls. There are people, obviously, who don't make an immediate transition to the afterlife, so they sort of linger in a twilight between the worlds of the living and the dead. Tell me more about these earthbound souls and what can be done about them.
Sometimes people don't make the transition just sort of accidentally. They might have a sudden unexpected death, and they don't seem to realize they're dead. This can go on for quite a long period of time in Earth years, in years of the living, because they're in a kind of a limbo or twilight place where time doesn't exist. And sometimes they stay deliberately. They have unfinished business. This is often related to settling grudges, or if they've been murdered, for example, bringing their murderer to justice. These are more active hauntings, and I don't think that they account for that many hauntings. I think most of them are residues, but I have encountered them in my own investigations. Eventually, these souls do find their place to the afterlife, but in the meantime, they might cause a lot of problems for the living in a particular house. And the best remedy for that is to have a medium or a psychic attempt to make contact with the invisible occupant, find out what their situation is, and provide some help in making the transition. Sometimes it can be a matter of taking care of some unfinished business, or helping them arrive at a state of peace about what's happened to them so that they can move on. And that often will bring an end to the activity.
There's probably no one more frightened of ghosts than someone who's committed a murder, if you know what I mean.
Well, absolutely, yes. And there are so many cases of vengeful ghosts. But when they're wandering around, kind of lost in this twilight, it's hard to find the people they want to get back at, so they just cause a lot of problems for the living. And these could be very active hauntings where people feel a very oppressive presence. They might have dark, shadowy figures, heavy energy, bedroom visitations at night that are very scary, unpleasant smells, a lot of strange noises, objects getting moved around, discomfort, marked discomfort to the living.
Now, if someone has been murdered and their ghost is earthbound, their spirit is earthbound, is that why they're earthbound? Because they're waiting around, they're trying to communicate to somebody and let them know who was responsible for their murder?
Not everyone, and in fact, nobody really knows the exact conditions that create some of these earthbound cases, because not everyone who's had a tragic death lingers on. I've been in some places where murders have taken place, and the haunting activity seems to be very low level. There's residual energy, but it doesn't seem like the victims themselves are still around. So it's a very uneven sort of type of haunting, and it may have to do, again, with some of the energy in the landscape that enables people to hang on.
Well, let's talk about energized land. It's number 4. We already talked about burial sites a little earlier on, so let's skip to energized land. And as you say, sometimes the land itself holds an energy that enables or facilitates haunting activity.
The Earth is a very active place, and it's got many areas that are known as portals. These are doorways between dimensions. The land can have energy that comes from its geophysical composition and contours. Caves, old mining operations, underground water, magnetic contents of the soil like iron and magnetite can contribute to these energy patterns where things from other realms congregate or stay. And we all know places like that areas that have the reputation for being highly haunted. All kinds of things go on. And these places all have certain characteristics in common that we associate with this kind of activity. So sometimes when I get a case and I hear where it is, I'm not all that surprised because I've collected so many other cases from the same areas, and it does seem to be related to certain things in the land itself. Now, there are remedies for that. Sometimes the energy patterns in the landscape can be sort of rearranged, and master dowsers can do that to a certain extent. They're able to redirect the flow of energy patterns so that a house, for example, may not be so bothered. Sometimes, if there are non-human spirits causing the haunting problem, then it may require bringing in someone who's got psychic or mediumistic skills to have a little chat and see if some sort of agreement can be arrived at. Sometimes you might have to get someone in who can do expulsion, for example. And sadly, I have quite a few cases where nothing seems to work very well, and people wind up moving. There are these profiles in these heavily haunted areas where we see frequent turnover of ownership, and if you can talk to a series of owners, you find out that they all experience the same sort of thing, and it just got to be too much for them.
Well, and if you're willing to put up with some of that spirit activity, you could get yourself a pretty good, a sweet deal in a house in the Hudson Valley or West Virginia.
Well, there are some places that they do wind up sitting on the market, and I had one case several years ago, for example, that wasn't too far from where I live, and these people got what they thought was a fantastic deal on a house that had sat on the market for a long, long time, and it was heavily haunted from the get-go. And then they sometimes people learn from the neighbors, or they do research, and they find out certain things about the area that start explaining all these weird things that go on. People have different tolerance levels too, and sometimes some people are more bothered than others. There are some people they're like catalysts, and wherever they go, if there's dormant, latent phenomena, it will get really stirred up when they come on the scene. And other people seem to have very strong buffers around them. They can even sort of deaden out the phenomena, and they're not bothered by it at all.
We're going to take a break here, but I think we can squeeze one more in on the list of the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Occult activity, that's seems to be a bit of a no-brainer, obviously. If one is involved in occult activity, you're going to attract that sort of that type of specter, I guess.
Seeing this more and more too now, Richard, because all the attention on the supernatural that we've seen in the past few decades in the media, that's encouraged people to try things like spirit communication, spirit summoning, spell casting. And if people are dabbling around and they don't know what they're doing, they can create situations in the environment where they invite spirits to come in and they don't leave, and this creates haunting activity as well. So you want to do environmental cleansing. Sometimes you have to bring in an exorcist to do literally a house exorcism of unwanted presences. And, of course, if any occult activity has been going on the property that has contributed to the problem and still going on, you should stop it and get rid of the things that were involved in that.
Now, I have a sort of a long-running debate with the mighty Aphrodite. There are certain horror pictures that she will not allow to be played in the house because she believes if we're to watch, let's say, for example, The Exorcist, that you're opening yourself up to be visited by that kind of activity. What are your thoughts on that, Rosemary?
In a way, yes, because where we put our attention, that's where the energy goes, and we can attract certain things. I think watching a scary movie isn't going to do that in and of itself. But if you were to start focusing a lot of your attention on the spirit realm, and especially the scary aspect of the spirit realm, well, it does put your energy on a different level that could attract certain unwanted presences. But I don't think that alone accounts for a lot of haunting activity. You would have to combine it with some other things. Now, people do a lot of seances and spirit communication, even things that they think would be entertainment or even of a harmless nature. Well, people can open up very powerful doorways without really realizing it, and that can cause problems too.
All right, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, her website, visionaryliving.com. We'll take a time out. We'll come back and talk about spirit attachments, curses and psychic attacks, and possession. That'll round out the list of the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted, right here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Rosemary Ellen Guiley stays with us for a few moments yet as we round out the list of the top 8 reasons why a house is haunted and what to do about it. Curses and psychic attacks, number 7. Oh, sorry, let's go to 6 first. Spirit attachments. Spirit attachments, Rosemary.
Quite a common experience, and this is something that I think is on the rise too. People are realizing it. Spirits can attach to objects and literally ride into a house on the object. I don't want to say that every time you go out and buy something, especially secondhand, if you like to shop for antiques like I do, and estate sales and things like that, but objects that have been in possession of other people, people leave their residual energy in these objects. Sometimes spirits who are attracted to certain people, when those people pass on, the spirits latch on to objects that have the energy of that person associated with it. And you acquire the object, the spirit comes along into your house. And if the environment is favorable enough, if conditions are right, sometimes they can lodge into your space and create haunting activity.
And it doesn't have to be something conspicuous like an antique bonnet chest. It could be something very small, like a piece of estate jewelry.
Oh, absolutely. Anything, literally. And one of my colleagues, John Zaffis, who lives here in Connecticut, a friend of mine, and we've investigated cases together. We're now working on a book on haunted objects. And the cases we've dealt with are ordinary things, everyday objects, but sometimes a lot of secondhand things. And so the remedy for that is usually removal of an object. In fact, I recall a case that I had in Canada as a result of your show some years ago, and I think we talked about on the air, where a mason apron that had belonged to a grandfather had some energy of his that had lingered with the object, and it was inherited by a family member, and they had haunting activity in the house. And when they removed the apron from the house, the activity went away. So removal of the object will get rid of the activity. Sometimes the spirit activity can be sort of neutralized or nullified, but John and I usually recommend that just get rid of it if you want the best solution.
You call those Trojan horse objects.
Yes, because they're unexpected. Something that you don't expect comes in and then starts creating problems. And this can range from mild activity to really disturbing activity. Some of the cases that John and I have seen over the years, people have nightmares, their health is affected, objects start moving around, they hear strange sounds, and they don't often immediately associate with something that they've brought in. So that's one of the first questions that paranormal investigators should ask when investigating a haunting is, have there been any major changes in possessions in the house? Even small things, and jewelry especially is high up on the list because it's so personal, and it's something that people can wear for years, like a favorite necklace, a ring, a bracelet, that sort of thing.
All right, where are we on the list? Is it curses and psychic attacks?
Not very common, but deserves to be on the list because we do see it from time to time. There are individuals, sadly, out there who try and harm people. They have magical knowledge. They know something about spell casting and about summoning spirits to go out and do tasks. And they can create environments in homes that are very unhealthy for people. They literally send bad energy or negative spirits into a place to create havoc. And sometimes these attacks, curses and psychic attacks, they're directed at a person, like somebody they've got a grudge match with. We see this a lot in unrequited love and in cases where somebody's having an affair and the person on the outside wants to get rid of a spouse or disrupt a marital relationship. Sadly, it's not uncommon. And so these sorts of things can happen. Quite often, the agent that creates the haunting is one of these Trojan horses, like a gift that is given. John and I have a number of cases where, like an ex or a spurned lover has pretended to be nice and given a gift. It's brought into the household. It's really got a curse attached to it. And the spirit that comes along with that then starts creating a lot of problems. So removal, sometimes you have to bring in an expert to break a curse. There are psychics and mediums and magical practitioners who, depending on what it is that's causing the problem, they have a variety of remedies that they can use to expel the unwanted presence or energy from the place.
Just got like 30 seconds to talk about possession, number 8.
Not very common, but like curses and psychic attacks, sometimes individuals get the attachment. They literally become possessed by a negative spirit, and that affects the household. It's not just the possessed person, but it changes the entire atmosphere in the place where they're living, and the people around them are affected in a negative way by that. So you've got to exorcise the offending spirit from the person to get rid of it from the place as well.
Rosemary, always a pleasure, and we will check in with you in 1 month's time. Be well.
Thank you, Richard. You too.
Rosemary Ellen Guiley, visionaryliving.com. Don't forget to visit her bookstore. 50 books and counting. Remarkable. All right, when we come back, our media scientist, Nelson Thal, checks in with another edition of State Psyops. You want to stick around for that.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
And here he is, our very own Howard Beale, mad prophet of the airwaves, media scientist Nelson Thal with another installment of State Psyops. Hey, Nelson, how are you?
Very good, Richard. Yes, it's State Psyops. I think that's a much better title of what we've been doing. State secrets are still part of it, but it's a good Twitter name, @State Psyops.
That's right. If they go to richardsyrett.com and they want to read these articles that you're alluding to in full, just click on, this week, the show, and scroll down to the State Psyops segment, and you'll see in bold red letters in capitals, read the full articles here, and keep in mind, Psyops is spelled Psyops. PSYOPS.
Richard, one of the items is this 28-year-old CEO of Bitcoin exchange dead after possible suicide. And, of course, law of averages, you know, before we talk to anybody in the intelligence game, is she was suicided. Ash Wednesday Plot was a great story written by Sherman Skolnick about the murder of Dr. Kelly, David Kelly, and how they did such a poor job of making it look like a suicide that they still left the tourniquet around his arm and they didn't take the needle all the way out. They left the front of the needle. I mean, the whole thing was botched. We've got a death list, the banker's death list, and you've been following it. And,
yes,
of course, there are forces that are attempting to topple the U.S. dollar. This is not new. We're not coming up with anything new. We're just connecting the dots here because you've got the attempt to topple the U.S. dollar as fiat money, as reserve currency going on. And I refer everybody to the famous book, The Conspiracy Against the Dollar by Dr. Beater.
So in this case, we've got this 28-year-old woman, quite lovely, Autumn Radke, chief executive of First Meta Point Limited, and found dead in her Singapore home February 26. Singapore police said they're investigating her unnatural death, and preliminary investigations showed no foul play suspected. But Bitcoin, it is growing in popularity despite attempts to sort of bring it down. It's still trading at about $600 for a single coin, and that has to be perceived as a threat to the hegemony of the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, remember the wars being fought backstage in the sub-media world, the sub-media world, what we media scientists call it, the world off the radar screens of commercial media or politics. So the banker's death list is because they're trying to the forces that are waging war to topple the U.S. dollar, to keep it quiet, are killing the bankers, Richard. Just go back to our previous shows. We've been doing a number of shows on the banker's death list that started to show up last October and November and has been growing ever since.
And again, many of the bankers on that list, and depending on who you follow, Gerald Celente says the number is up to around 20. Many of these are forex traders, foreign exchange traders. So again, we're talking about currency. Nelson, I did want to talk about the story everyone's talking about, and it's this downed Malaysian plane, the 777. These planes have a great safety record, and now there's rumblings that it was maybe shot out of the sky by a North Korean missile.
Let's not forget that it was Pierre Salinger, you and I brought Pierre Salinger on CFRB, and he was JFK's press secretary, and he reported that TWA was shot down by a missile, and the U.S. government lied about it. And let's not forget that General Benton Parton and Admiral Moore, the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, took out a full-page ad in the New York Times in which he claimed that the U.S. government National Transportation Safety Board was burned their notes and was screwing around with the forensics in order to fudge the facts and make it look like the government case was true. So, Richard, we're stand in line. We've got the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff talking about how planes are being shot out of the sky, and this is part of it too. This was a missile. Somebody on board was a banker. You don't want to get on a plane with a banker that is in the way of toppling the U.S. dollar, and that's what's going on.
Well, also the other rumblings are that China has already issued a series of warnings about North Korean missiles, including one that crossed paths with a Chinese airliner carrying about 220 people just last week. So who knows?
And the executive order was signed by Obama. We've got it on the state PSYOPs. There's a link to it. The executive order where he has launched and declared war on China. Obama has.
This is an economic war. Obviously, we're talking about.
All wars today are fought with many things. There's cultural wars. The war in Ukraine is part of the conspiracy against the dollar to try and raise up nationalism in order to force the Europeans to grow so that they can topple the U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, they're fomenting Quebec nationalism. And this is being talked about backstage by the seasoned linguists, retired spies.
Well, tell me more about this, what they're calling an bombshell, this war secretly declared on China by executive order. Tell me more.
Well, the Chinese are the largest creditors of the United States and are trying to discount the debt and sell it. You know, it's just like, remember, companies buy up receivables, accounts receivables. Well, the Chinese are tired of the Americans. They want to get rid of the debt, so they're shopping the debt around. And this is causing those who want to support the U.S. dollar, mostly Britain and America, the queen of the Commonwealth, Remember, fiat money is Commonwealth money. The British Commonwealth money today is fiat money. And the British and the Americans have made a lot of enemies by playing tough cop and playing the cop of the world and doing a very biased job of it. As we know, making up stories that there's mass destruction and bombing and killing innocent people. So the enemies have gotten together and are waging war against the dollar in all fronts, economic, political, and military.
First we have trade wars, followed by currency wars, and after the currency war, it often spills out onto the main stage as a full-fledged war of armies and missiles.
Biological weapons.
Biological weapons, yeah.
They've got weapons that just kill the Jews, or just kill the Irish, or just kill the blacks, or just kill the Italians. There's all sorts of sophisticated weaponry in a number of the arsenals here. Exactly. Don't forget that.
All right. Well, let's go back to Ukraine, which, of course, is another hot spot right now. And there is talk that Blackwater, infamous Blackwater, may already have boots on the ground in Ukraine. What do you know about that?
Well, look, Russia and America can't fight a war using nuclear weapons, so they use commandos in cities, just like kids do with video games. And the wars that you see being fought now are the wars like you're going to see in video games. The video games portray it beautifully, Xbox and those things. And that's what's happening now in the Ukraine as they fight it out over the dollar bill and the fiat money. And Britain and America do not want to give up the fiat money luxury they've had for 200 years. It would cause a great depression in America, a huge depression.
Nelson Thal is with us with another installment of State Psyops. Yes, we've changed the name from State Secrets to State Psyops, and you can read the full articles on the Twitter page, State Psyops. Again, let me remind you, Psyops is one of those tricky words. It's state followed by Psyops, which is spelled P, as in Peter, S-Y, short for psychological, and then ops. So it's P-S-Y-O-P-S, State Psyops. Now, one of the stories on the Twitter page is rather ominous sounding, Nelson, and it's entitled The End of America. What do you mean by that?
Well, the people who have put together this Porter Stanley and top-level economic group out of Wall Street have talked about the toppling of the dollar and the attack on the U.S. dollar in economic terms and the debt that is owed by America and how we're on the verge of a huge devaluation of the currency, a huge devaluation of the currency. And eventually what will happen is that will have a monumental effect on the standard of living of the average American because, of course, it's going to have an effect on the price of commodities as well as gold.
And the story goes on to talk about the actual day this is going to go down, something like July. Is it July 14th of this year?
Well, they're pegging it at a date, and the reason why they can set a date is because it's when a law goes into effect. And the law will demand currency controls and will start to place more Big Brother control over the operations of the money world. And that's going to cause a situation where they'll very much lose the support of the world and lose their fiat currency on that day. And the Arabs will stop accepting U.S. dollars in payment for oil. So all the nations of the world that have to buy oil have to buy U.S. dollars. They won't need to buy U.S. dollars. So just think of all those U.S. dollars that have been bought to purchase oil from the Arabs won't need to be bought. There's no demand for it. There'll be a huge devaluation in the value of the U.S. dollar like we've never seen in the history of the world. Dollar.
In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.